Hey everybody, today I'm taking a look at Brussels 1893, which is a 2 to 5 player Euro strategy worker placement style board game designed by Etienne Esperman and published by Z-Man Games back in 2013. Before I get started on my review of Brussels 1893, I want to give a shout out to the show sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer here in the UK. And if you use my link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. Okay, so the setup for Brussels 1893 is going to look like this. Now, the main board here comes in two halves, I suppose, and one of these halves is made up of these modular strips. You have a different layout each time you play the game, and these are all the different worker placement spots that you can use throughout the game. To the left-hand side of the board here, you have a lot of kind of mechanical facets of the game, as well as cards you can draft, as well as tracks you can climb, and a few additional worker placement spots at the top here. Additional components include these works of art, you have the money, and you have the resources which are used to build buildings. And each player's personal setup is going to look like this, where you have your personal player board, which monitors the buildings that you can build and the costs for doing so, as well as this additional architectural track, which is going to be very relevant for endgame scoring. Everybody's going to start with one of these Georges Bruman cards, as well as a few workers. And something that's worth noting is that a couple of your workers are going to start in jail here. Now, the game is going to play out over 5 rounds, and by the end of that 5th round, the player with the most victory points will be the winner. But let's talk about how the game works mechanically. Now, there is quite a lot going on in this game, so I may miss a few minor rules, but hopefully you'll get the gist. So as mentioned before, this is a worker placement style game where each player's turn is going to consist of placing a worker. Now, more often than not, you're going to be placing them on this part of the board, but the important thing is that the first thing you do each round is that you will refer to this card here, and depending on the player count, you are going to basically divide up a certain portion of the board. So you can see here, let's say we're playing a 3-player game. The first player will put this little kind of bracket on the 1 to 4 axes or the 4 to 1 axes. So what you're going to do is you're going to have a look at the grid here. So I've already prepared it. So I've got the 4 here and the 1 there, which means that this area within that bracket is the area we're playing in right now. And all these spots to the outer perimeter are completely blocked off and not going to be available this round. And this is going to change from round to round as well. It can be bigger, it can be smaller, so you're not quite sure what you're playing with. And after you've done that, you are going to go into the main bulk of the actions, where you're going to place your worker on one of these worker placement spots. Now, the important thing in this game is that not only do you place your worker, you have to accompany it with at least 1 coin. So let's just say I ended up putting my work up here, like so. Now, let's talk about what all the different actions do and how they synergize with one another. So let's start with this top left-hand action here with this little top hat man. That refers to drafting nobles from this part of the board. So in addition to paying your original fee to place the worker in the first place, you can draft these characters, paying more if you want the ones to the further to the left. This one is always going to be free. And when you take these characters, in addition to paying the fee here, you are going to either commit to them by adding them in front of you for good. So you can add it to your little character display like so. You get to use the power immediately by tapping it and take the corresponding action. So in this example, it will be to climb this eagle track here, or this shield track, and I'll talk about the relevance of that shortly. And the important thing is as well that you don't actually have to commit to these characters, because if you commit to them, it means that you are going to have them for the rest of the game. But at the end of the game, you're going to have to pay their wages here, which is the amount in this little circle. And if you can't do that, you're going to end up risking losing points. However, if you wanted to, you can draft that character, use it once, and then discard it. And these characters are going to do a bunch of different things. For example, here, this one will allow you to take one of your workers back from jail. This one here will let you climb the architect track. This will give you 2 wild resources. This will give you a specific resource, or will let you convert a wild resource into 2 specific resources, and so on. And there's a bunch of those cards in this deck. This action here will simply allow you to take 2 specific resources from the supply, not including these wild white ones. This action here will allow you to build buildings, and when you do that, you are going to have a look at your lowest row of your player board here to show how many resources you need. So you can see here the bottom row needs 2 resources, and those resources are going to relate to this wheel here, which shows the type of resources you need to use. So you can see here that this one needs a teal cube and 3 money. And if I ever need, say, more than 2 resources, I'm going to have at least 1 of each, and then obviously a duplicate of the other. Again, this one is going to have at least 1 of each. And once you've spent those resources, the player who's just built it is going to move this wheel to another spot like so, which is going to change the resources needed for the next person. And if this blank spot comes into play, then all the resources are going to have to be to the other kind of hand of the watch there. And once you've spent those resources, as long as they're not wild, you will get 5 points. Additionally, you will get to place one of your buildings somewhere on the grid here, as long as that spot is not taken. So let's just say, for example, I put it on here. Now this is going to be relevant because now on, if anybody lands on a building or uses the worker placement spot that you own, then you are going to get a reward. This spot here is going to allow you to draw a random piece of art from the stack. You're going to dive in there and grab one of them. And these come in a bunch of different colours. Now, depending on how many times you've been the first player to pass, you pick up one of these tokens, which will actually allow you to draw more art tiles and then discard until you only have 1. So it gives you more flexibility to get the exact colour that you want, which can be very important. And I believe the final action from this part of the board is this one here, where you are going to have the ability to sell your art. And when you sell your pieces of art, you are going to take one of the colours, you are going to place it on one of these spots here, like so, as long as there is not one of those colours already on display. So for example, if I've just sold this blue piece of art, then the next person would not be able to sell a blue piece of art until this one is covered up or overlapped with another colour. Now, something that's also important is depending on how many pieces of art you had in front of you when you sold it, you are going to be able to manipulate this player piece on this grid here. So let's just say I only had this piece of art and I wanted to shift it, say, this way, like so, because again, I had one piece of art, I could move it once orthogonally, and then I'm going to get as many points and money equal to the colour of the piece of art that I just sold. So you can see I sold a blue one, therefore I'm going to have a look where the blue box is. I'm going to get 2 coins and I'm going to get 4 points. Now, in addition to the bulk of the actions over there, you do have these few communal spaces where more than one person can go. And when you go to these spots, the first time you use it, you have to spend 1 worker, then the following player will have to place 2, and then 3, and so on. So these can gobble up your workers quite quickly if you want to use them. Now, this one here allows you to take 3 of these wild white resources, which are great because they can be used as anything. However, if you do construct a building with them, you will not get any victory points. So they're good to get your buildings down, but will not give you any instant points. This one here will allow you to take coins equal to the value of the card here, and this can fluctuate from quite low, I think like 3 or something, all the way up to 7 or so. This one here will allow you to take any of the other actions we've already talked about, and this one here will allow you to activate as many noble cards you've collected equal to your place on the track here. So, if I really focus on pushing up this track with a single placement, I can activate up to 5 of my characters. So that's a really good strategy if you want to focus on collecting these guys. And that is essentially how the game is going to work until all players have passed. The first player who passes is going to take one of these little round markers, just to monitor the progress of the game, and then you're going to go into a bit of an admin phase. Now, there's several factors that are important, not only from the instant actions you're taking when you place your worker, but you have to consider other things, because at the end of the round, whoever has the highest value of money in any of these columns, like for example, the blue player has 3 coins here to no competition, would get the benefit of the card from the bottom of that particular column. And these could be things, again, such as climbing the shield track, climbing that noble track, 2 up the shield track here, taking a worker back from prison, climbing the architect track, and so on. Now, whoever claims these cards can either use them for that main ability there, or they can actually choose to tuck them under their player board based on these 4 different categories of endgame scoring. So for example, this one here will give you a point for every worker you have, surplus of 3, but if I tuck this one under here, it'll be, 2 points. This one here is for every noble you have, this one here is for every work of art you have remaining, and this one here is for every 4 coins you have. And you can probably imagine, the more you collect these cards, you can end up racking up quite a lot of points if you focus that way. Now, in addition to working out the majority of those columns, you're also going to have a look at how many shields are completely surrounded by meeples consisting of any colour. Now, whoever's got the majority of the meeples around that shield is going to get points equal to their position on the shield track over here. So again, if you really focus on building up that track, then you can end up racking up a lot of points if you focus on getting the majorities around those shields. And something else that's important to consider is that the player or players who have the majority of their workers in these neutral spots will send one of their workers to prison like so, meaning that you're going to have fewer workers to work with in the future, but also means that you're going to have to spend some effort into getting majorities in things like this or nobles such as this to unlock them from the prison to gain access to them once more. And I just wanted to talk through the benefits you get when other people land on your buildings or worker placement spots. For example, when anybody takes one of these spots and you've already got your building on it, then you'll get to use one of these black pieces of art, which you can only access in this way. And they'll be used just as any other piece of art, by placing them on the board there, moving the grid around and taking the corresponding reward. If somebody used your building and it was on this spot, then you get to activate one of your nobles instantly. This one here means you'll get a point for every piece of art you have in front of you. This one here will give you a point for every building you've already deployed on the board. This one here will give you a resource of your choice. And after that fifth and final round, you're going to add up all the points you've got during the game to your end game scoring, which will consist of all these different criteria here, which we've already talked about. And also you're going to get points equal to your position on the track here, relating to how many buildings you've built. So for example, if I push all the way up to here, for example, I'm going to get 6 points per building I've deployed on the board. So you can imagine there, once you've got all the buildings down and you've went right to the track here, you can actually get 60 points there should you focus on it. So there we have it, that's the basic run through of Brussels 1893, but let's share some thoughts on the game. So first off, I really do enjoy the way everything is so well synergized in this game, all the different aspects, and there's quite a lot of them. This is a pretty kitchen sink style game, but I love the way that everything so harmoniously merges together, especially when it relates to the worker placement side of things, because there are layers upon layers of decisions to be made here. Yes, you want the actions. Those actions are going to be more limited depending on the size of the bracket. If it's a very tight board this round, then there's going to be very few options to choose from. At the same time, that might force you to use other players' buildings, which will give them rewards. You want to be competing for the columns, especially if there's a very specific reward you want at the bottom there. Maybe you are falling behind on one of the tracks. You want to really push for your architecture track. You might really want to focus on that one there. At the same time, you want to be making sure that you're at least aware of the points that are going to be distributed from completing and surrounding these shields. Because again, if somebody's really focused on pushing up those shield tracks and you're putting the final piece in that quarter, then you're going to basically be gifting them a bunch of points there because you've completed it. Therefore, it's eligible for scoring. So yeah, so I love the multiple dimensions of decision making when it comes to the single worker placement mechanism. I love the range of strategies that you can adopt in this game. So many different ways and paths you can follow. As I mentioned, you can really focus on that shield track, just getting the majorities around them. You can focus on these nobles. If you push up really far on that track, you can activate a bunch of them with a single placement, which can give you huge rewards, but at a cost, of course, because you're going to have to make sure that you pay those wages, which is another kind of aspect you need to be aware of, and it will put you under a bit of a pressure at times if you can't get your hand on that money. You can really focus on buying and selling artwork. The more art that you collect means you can have a lot more power and stroke and influence when it comes to manipulating the market, making sure you get the full reward, the 6 coins and the 6 points every time that you you sell a piece of artwork. You can focus on building, getting those resources, giving yourself flexibility there, and climbing up that architect track and getting those huge 60 points by deploying them all. And even more than that if you're not using those wild resources. So yeah, so many different paths you can go down here, and you can definitely dabble in each of them, but you can also kind of tunnel vision yourself and try to go something a bit more specific. There's also some minor design points here that add a lot more interest to the game. Like, for example, as I mentioned, by using those neutral spots, you're going to be sending more and more people to prison. If you keep on, going there too often, which is nice. I also like the restriction of not being able to keep spamming the same color of artwork, which adds some, passive player interaction there. If you know that your opponent's going to likely sell a piece of artwork this turn and you've got the jump on them in terms of player order, you can sell your piece first and block them out of doing so. You've got some player interaction here with the resource wheel. Again, you can have a look at what your opponents are collecting. Maybe they're really struggling on money. You build something, you shift this over so that they're going to have to pay a lot of money if they want to build something. So yeah, just these little touches that take games like this over the edge and just add that little spark of magic. I also enjoy that decision of whether to use these now or commit to them for the rest of the game. Now, likely, later in the game when you only have a round or two left, you're probably not going to commit to them. You're going to use them once because you don't want to have that burden of wanting to pay their wages, particularly with the more powerful characters because they can be quite costly. So yeah, I love that decision of, do I want to use it now or do I want to use it for the long term? And that also applies to these rewards here. Because even though you've won a majority and you might have already maxed out one of these tracks, you can still use them for the other criteria by tucking them under your board and focusing on that kind of sub-strategy. So yeah, in terms of, interlocking mechanisms and meaningful decisions, this game has a ton of things you need to consider and it earns my full respect because it's so meticulously designed. The game also ticks along at a very good pace. There is only 5 rounds here. If you're playing at that 2 or 3 player count, you can probably get this game done in around 60 to 75 minutes, which is great considering the amount of decisions you have here. If you're leaning towards that, 4 to 5 player count, you're probably looking around an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours if you're a bit slower, but still definitely does not outstay its welcome. The turns themselves are pretty rapid as well, so you're not going to be sitting around for too long waiting for your turn to come around. Now, the player interaction is, in spades here. I've already talked about the competition for the shields, the columns, just to get the, your workers in the spots you want in the first place, depending on the size of the bracket there. If you're first player, you can really choose to kind of put all of your buildings within the bracket, therefore you're likely to get the rewards by people using those spots. You've got the interaction of the art market here, which you can really mess with other people because, if you're going for blue art, you're pushing it this way, but the yellow player or the person who's going for yellow art is going to be pushing it this way, which of course is going to conflict with each other. You've got the resource wheel, which is going to mess with the people, the competition for the nobles that you want, the competition to not have the most people in the spots here to send them to jail. And so you can really see that every aspect of this game at least has some passive interaction as well as some direct interaction. I think the game scales well in general. I probably won't really play this very often at 2 players because I do like that extra wild card when it comes to the majorities and things. And I love the kind of escalation of the game because in the first few rounds, you'll probably find yourself only putting a coin or 2 down to get those majorities. But by the end of the game, you're desperate to get those extra points. And you can end up committing like 5, 6, 7 coins with each single placement you make. So it does have that cool forward trajectory and turns get more and more tense and more meaningful. And finally, let's talk about some of the production choices here. In terms of its visuals, I think the game looks fantastic. There's nothing else out there that looks like this. This kind of Art Deco look with these stylized characters and buildings, I think it has a very distinct visual appeal to it. And the physical production, I think, is spot on. Not overdone, not underdone. Everything's nice and good quality, not too big, not too small. You've got your standard Euro pieces. There's no kind of colourblind issues here. Everything is just as it should be, to the point where it's good quality, but not superfluous. Yes, spot on in terms of my own, preferences. So let's get into my final thoughts on Brussels 1893. And if you can't tell, I think this game is absolutely stellar. There is so much to like here. A ton of things going on, but probably one of the best examples of interlocking, well-developed and harmonious mechanisms that I've ever seen. So much to consider with every single one of your turns. I love the interlocking mechanisms and that. The way they've amplified the whole worker placement genre by not only, making your initial placement important for the action you want, but contributing to something longer term in terms of getting these column majorities, because climbing these tracks is of paramount importance. And also that additional wrinkle of the majorities with the shield here. And I have seen this really impact a game and determine a winner. So everything has to be considered and nothing can be overlooked. Just a bunch of mechanisms put together. Yet it is dry, very mechanical. And, you can see the gears working here, but if you can look past that and you don't want, tons of theme from your game, then it does not really get much better than Brussels 1893. There's not a single thing about the game that I don't like, and I think it's just a stellar game and just a brilliant design. And I'm very happy to say that this game is going to be reprinted in 2023 with the expansion included. Now, I've not played the expansion and I'm not sure what it adds. For me, this game is perfect as it is, but I would be intrigued to see what it offers. But yeah, as it is, I'm very happy that this game is going to be more widely available. And hopefully, if it appeals to you, this video has shined some light on that. So yeah, it's going to get a very high recommendation from me. And yeah, up there with my favourite Euros right now. That is Brussels 1893.